Mishnah says in Tainis, Chamisha Dvorim Iru Tisha B'Av. 5 things in history occurred on Tisha B'Av. First one was the Gzeira of the Dor HaMidbar took place on Tisha B'Av. First Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Second Beis HaMikdash. After Churban Bayesheni, Beitar, the last stronghold of Bar Kokhba, was destroyed. And lastly, Nechrish Ha'ir, Tunis Rufus Harosha, plowed over the city of Yerushalayim completely. These 5 tzaros are really the essence of the day. They're a reality. Tzaros, Yisurim, tragedies, calamities, create a reality, and they are the essence of what Tisha B'Av is. It's a day of Churban. That is the Metzius. It's what this day is all about. And the Churban itself is a manifestation of the sins that caused that Churban. Person is chote, he causes around him Gehenna. The Nefesh HaChaim says, we make a bracha asher kiddishonu b'mitzvosov. Person does a mitzvah, he creates an aura of kedusha around him, and that kedusha is the Gan Eden that he'll get after 120 years. It goes with him, it's part of him. The opposite, lo aleinu, a person does an aveira, he surrounds himself with Gehenna. And that's the same Gehenna that will be his lot after 120 years. That's what we say, Hatzileni meirodfai ki omtzu mimeni velapyan. What it means is not just that my enemies are stronger than me, but omtzu mimeni, they get their strength from me. The aveir is the chatoim we do, create a reality, create a churban. And our enemies, whether they're physical enemies or spiritual enemies, get their strength from our aveiros, from our chatoim, and they become a reality in time. And this day, the chatoim of all the doros that created the necessity for all these churbanos, created a day of churban, a day where the day itself is muchan lepuranios. It's part of the essence of the day. And therefore other tzaras happened throughout history. Spanish Inquisition, Gerush Sfarad took place in 1492 on Tisha B'Av. World War I, which was just a prelude to World War II, began on Tisha B'Av. Many, many other tzaras throughout history have occurred on this day because the day itself, in its essence, is a day of Churban. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Rav Gamliel heard an almana crying for her only child that died. And he reminded himself of Churban Beis HaMikdash and cried along with her. The Yalkut Shimoni says another Maisa, there was an almana who cried 7 years for her children. And Rav Gamliel, when he heard her crying, cried along with her and cried for the Churban. Rav Zaitchik, Zatzal, says, what does the crying of an almana for her children have to do with the Churban? Why did Rav Gamliel remember the Churban then and cry for the Churban? because all tzaras throughout history are a result of Churban Beis HaMikdash. Created a reality, it created an essence of Churban in the world, and all the tzaras that we hear of daily almost. People leaving their children in cars, Rahmana Litzlan, little children dying. If you cry along with that, you hear also the Churban, because that's also part of this Puranios that exists in the world since Churban Beis HaMikdash. Chazal say that since the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, so many things are changed in nature. The tam from Paris has gone away, there's no Kli Schuchis, and etc., etc. The Churban made a Roshem, it left a mark on the world. The world's not the same world anymore. However, all that Churban and all these Yisurim didn't come because the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to Chas v'Sholom hurt us or take revenge on us. The Torah says, Beferish, the Afghan Zos biyosam be'eretz oivehem, even when we're in Galus, even when all of these sorrows and all of this tragedy and calamity exists in the world, lo ma'astim, the Rebbeinu Shalom isn't disgusted with us. V'lo ga'altim lechalosam, he's not interested in destroying us. Lahofer brisi tam, he's not interested in abrogating his covenant with us. Ki ani Hashem Elokeichem, just the opposite. It's from the darkness and from the Churban that comes the ability to be renewed, to do tshuva, and to once again correct all of those negatives and come back to Eretz Yisrael, come back to Yerushalayim, to build the Beis HaMikdash, Bias Mashiach. And therefore, as much as Tisha B'Av is a day that has in it, in its essence, Churban, Sorah, Aveira, and Chet, it also has a tremendous potential. Tisha B'Av was the day that Yaakov Avinu fought with the Malach and overcame the sorrow Shel Esav. And it has in it also that power to overcome all of the tzaras and all of the Yisurim and all the Churbanos, and to become Yisrael once again. Ki sorisa im Elohim v'im anoshim batuchal. And therefore Chazal say, Kol ha-misabel ha-Yerushalayim zoche v'roeh b'simchasa. Doesn't say yizke v'yireh b'simchasa, but zoche, immediately. If you really understand the purpose and the root of the Avelis, then you understand what the potential for Simcha is. They go together hand in hand. They are not opposites. But it's Dafka the Churban, it's Dafka the Gehenim that exists on Tisha B'Av, that is the cause and will be the trigger for all the Simcha that one day will be. Shalom HaKodesh says that there are three purposes for Galus. First, the purpose of Galus, Yisurim, Churbanos, is to cause us to do tshuva. Secondly, when a person does chatoim, the chatoim of the nature that can cause churban, so he creates, like we said, around him Gehenim. If he'll have that Gehenim in the next world, it'll be Oyin v'Norah. And therefore the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us an opportunity to have an exchange for that spiritual Gehenim, which is L'netzach, to have the Gehenim in this world, which is a lot less diminished, a lot less intense than the spiritual Gehenim. The Yisurim take the place of that Gehenim. And thirdly, to purify l'zachech u'letzarech, and to bring out tremendously good things from Klal Yisrael. The Tzoros itself, the Yisurim themselves, are an incentive to be able to do better, to bring out the potential that we have. And therefore the Beis HaLevi in his drasha says that one really should not be mitztayer on the Galus itself, on the essence of Galus, is really for positive reasons. What we should be mitztayer is that unfortunately the Galus also causes a miyut in kvod shamayim, in a miyut in avodas Hashem. And even though its purpose is very, very positive, but there are very, very negative things that are an outcome of it. That's what we should be mitztayer. But for the etzem Galus, the Rabbanu Shalom did it for a good purpose. First benefit, purpose of Galus is to cause us to do tshuva, as all Yisurim. Chazal say, Roe Adam Yisurim boim olav, Yifashbesh b'maisav, Yamashmesh b'maisav. Person sees he has Yisurim, then that Yisurim is a sign of tzara. It's a sign that something's wrong. It's like pain. Pain is a very, very positive thing. Because if a person couldn't experience pain, he would have terrible things happen to him and he wouldn't realize it. A person couldn't experience pain, he puts his hand onto a hot fire. He won't realize that something's wrong until his flesh is completely burnt up. But since we can experience pain, as soon as you put your hand on the fire, it hurts and you pull away. So too, Yisurim tell us something's wrong. If a person wouldn't know something's wrong and he continued doing those same averis and cause more churban and more tzar, so there'll be no hope. But the Rabbanu Shalom lets us see in this world what the result of our chatoyim are, that we're sick, something's wrong. And then we have a chance to stop doing what causes that pain and to repair it and correct it with tshuva. Now we say that somehow people have two different girsas in this Gemara. The girsa that all of the Shasan has is Haroa Yisurim Boim Olav Yifash Beish B'maisav Yimash Meish B'maisav. Look and see what you did wrong. Looking first, the Mesil Shasharim says, look at first to see what things are wrong or bad. And then look at the good things you did and see where they're missing, where you can improve them. I always like to say maybe there's another idea too. Pishpush, Yifashpesh. In the Beis HaMikdash there were pishpushim, there were little windows which you could see and hone in on very, very small things, small areas. Yifashpesh b'maisa. First look to find the specific averas that you did. And then you mashmesh, then pick them up and find out what caused them. Because the avera itself is not the cause, it's just a result. What midos roles do you have? What things cause those averas? What's the foundation, the root of those averas? You mashmesh b'maisa. Pick them up and see what you have to do, not just to do tshuva for those specific narrow things, but what kind of midos roles, what kind of causes are there for those deeds. Yimashmesh b'maisa. That's the girsa in our Gemara, and the Gemara says after that, pishpesh v'lo motza. If you looked and you didn't find anything, you looked through a magnifying glass, you couldn't find any averas that you did, then yitlein b'bittul Torah. Simple meaning that you should attribute it to the fact that bittul Torah is the biggest avera, and that's probably what caused it. Others say bittul Torah means if you couldn't find anything negative that you did, then probably it's because you haven't done things that are positive. Bittul Torah. Others say no, bittul Torah is an avera Gedolah. What does it mean? Pishpesh v'lo masa. You should have found that right away. But it means if you look through all your deeds and you couldn't find anything wrong and you couldn't find anything to improve, it's not because you're a tzaddik. It's because you're an amoritz. Because you don't know what's wrong. A person who has no idea what are averas and mitzvahs, he's a tzaddik gomer. He doesn't do anything wrong. He doesn't know what's wrong. So yitlein, not to be told of the yisurim, but yitlein, be told of the fact that you didn't find any averas with bittul Torah. You haven't learned enough. You'll learn a little bit more. You'll find out there's plenty of things that you need to correct. But somehow, I have a feeling that many people have a different gears in this Gemara. Instead of Yefash Beish B'Maisav, they have a girsa Yefash Beish B'Mezuzosov. Go check your mezuzahs. Don't check your deeds. Don't look into what you did. Blame it on the poor mezuzah. Not that I'm belittling that maybe there's an Indian taka that marumas in your mezuzahs. What's wrong with you? But don't blame it on the mezuzah. Don't think that it's extraneous things that call those itzoros. Because your mezuzah is not right, that you'll fix it up and that'll fix up everything. Yifash Beish B'Maisa. The mezuzah may be a sin in what's wrong with you. But don't blame the poor mezuzah. Mezuzah doesn't do anything, never harmed anybody, just hangs on the doorpost. What? Mezuzah. Absurd. So Yifash Beish B'Maisa. Not in all these extraneous things that people think cause tzoros. What causes tzoros is people cause tzoros. And the worst girsa that some people have is Yefash Beish B'Maasehem. Go blame somebody else. Chas v'sholom, not our fault. It's all those chilonim. It's all those who knows what, their fault. Right? Because all these people, these apikursim, these minim, it's their fault. It's not their fault. Salman Sorotskin says that you can learn this idea, not to look and blame others, no matter how bad they are and how good you are. Blame yourself. Jonah Hanavi, Tzaddik Gomer, is fit to be a Navi. And he had one chait, that when the Rebbeinu Shem told him to go and warn Nineveh that they were going to be destroyed if they didn't do tshuva. Nineveh was the capital of Ashur, who were the arch enemies of Klal Yisrael. And Jonah was afraid of two things. He was afraid that if they do tshuva, they wouldn't be destroyed. Somebody came to me and told me, the Rebbeinu Shem wants you to go and warn the Palestinians that they should do tshuva, otherwise they'll be destroyed. I'd also take a vacation. So Jonah said, I know that kovesh das nevuaso is chayed misa b'dei shamayim, but I'm willing to sacrifice my life for Klal Yisrael. Better the Ashur shouldn't do tshuva, they should be destroyed. Secondly, he was afraid that if the taka would do tshuva, it would be a terrible condemnation of Klal Yisrael. How many Nevi'im came to Klal Yisrael, they didn't do tshuva. These goyim, right away, are going to do tshuva. So he ran away. That was his only aveira. He was on a boat, sleeping down bottom of the boat, and there's a terrible storm, and the boat is in danger of being sunk. And there's 70 Ovdei Avodah Zorah, each one being Oved their Avodah Zorah at that moment to save them from this terrible storm. They're not people who in the past were Ovdei Avodah Zorah. They weren't people who were, secular students who had earrings or whatever, who now did tshuva. They were in the midst of being Oved Avodah Zorah now. 70 of them. And nothing helps, and the storm gets worse. And the captain looks around, he remembers there's another passenger on this boat, and he's not up there. He finds Jonah sleeping, and he wakes him up, and he says, look, I don't know who you are, but maybe you have a 71st God that we can try out. The other ones aren't working. And Jonah tells him, it's my fault. Get rid of me and everything will be okay. It's your fault. There's 70 people being over the Avodah Zorah now. It's their fault. You're a tzaddik gomer. You blame yourself. No, the Rebbeinu Shalom expects a lot more from the Jonah Hanavi than he expects from those 70 fools who were being over there Avodah Zarah. So you fashbesh b'maisav, don't blame other people. It's not their fault. We know better. And somebody who knows already lefashbesh b'maisav, then the Rebbeinu Shalom expects more from us. So don't blame them for the tzoros. If there's tzoros in the world, something's wrong with us. That's what the Gemara says. The Rambam says in the beginning of Hilchos Taniyos that is the purpose of every tainus. The purpose of a tainus is to be ma'orer. We cry out and we realize that tzoros don't just happen, but they are the manifestation, they're the hisgashmus of chet and aveira and hefsid. If there's imperfection in the world because of what we do, then we create imperfection, and we create tsar, and we create yisurim. And when we'll cry out for imminent tzoros and for past tzoros that haven't been corrected, then we'll recognize and realize that it's because of our chatoyim, and that will induce us and give us the incentive to do tshuva. That is the purpose of a tainus. That's why we're sitting on the floor here. One of the ways that Yisurim and Tzoros lead to tshuva is because people get complacent and they get in the habit of doing what they're doing and they don't think. Ami lo hisbonon, when you don't think, then the most terrible things can go by and you don't even realize them. Or the most phenomenal, wondrous things can go by and you don't realize them. Tells Rosh HaYeshiva points out, somebody would be walking their dog, and the dog would suddenly turn around and say, look, could you go a little bit slower, the pace a little bit too fast for me. The person would faint, scream, go get an agent to be able to somehow hire out this talking dog. But he wouldn't answer the dog and have a conversation with it. Bilam Arosha, no one ever heard a donkey talk in the history of the world. And all of a sudden, Bilam's donkey turns around and talks to him. Bilam should have fainted, should have screamed, should have done something. What does he do? Answers the donkey like it's threat. Why? Because Amilo, his bone on Bilam, never thought into anything. Wasn't prepared for it. He didn't think into it. So the most wondrous things can pass you by if you don't think. What an animal knows by instinct. Yod ashor koneu v'chamor evus ba'alav. An animal knows who feeds it. He knows who his master is. Instinct. But a human being was given thought and reason. If he doesn't think, then what is instinctive to an animal passes him by and evades him completely. Yisurim are there to break up habit, flow of life that lets you not think and just continue doing one day after another the same things. And not think what's going on in my life. Not to be impressed by wondrous good things, or Rahman al-Islam the opposite. Moshav Matityahu says that the greatest Yisurim after they heard Tzadik Tes Klolos. So the Tzadik Ches Klolos in Mishnah Torah. The Torah says, "Gam kol makom kol choli asher lo kosu b'sefer haTorah zeh." There's even worse things, and we can't even mention what they are. Zeh siluk hatzadikim. That's what the Rebbeinu Shalom takes away tzadikim, takes away the ma'orei hador. Says the Moshav Matityahu, why? Why is the Rebbeinu Shalom do that? He says because people get complacent and they rely on tzadikim, and they don't think themselves. You don't have to look up halacha. Look in the Shulchan Aruch, you have a shaila. No, ask Rav Eliyashiv. Foreign pshutim, the people themselves should haravam. When you have a dover akoshe, yoviu elecha. Stam, a person shouldn't know halacha. So we rely on all these sfarim, kitzurim, or whatever. We don't have to learn, have to know. Just Gedolah, they'll think for us. because people don't think, all the tzoras come. And therefore the greatest Yisurim, and the purpose of Yisurim is to be Gorim Tshuva, is you don't have those Gedolim to think for you anymore. You have to think for yourself. You can't do any more mitzvahs anoshim melumada, but you have to think and do them with kavana. You have to look up a halacha for yourself, not rely that somebody will tell you. And it's only those things that you can't do for yourself, then you have to go to a God. But the God should think for you. So too says in Michtav Eliyahu, therefore, because the greatest tzoras come because people keep mitzvahs anoshim melumada min hasofa v'lachutz. They don't think into what they're doing, not for good, not for bad. So the Rebbeinu Shem takes away those tzaddikim who people could rely on to think for them. And now you have to think for yourself. Sometimes a person thinks that everything is okay. And then a pain comes and he has to go to the doctor to find out what's wrong. Everything's not okay. It's also Yisurim. Person thinks everything's fine in his life, and all of a sudden things are not so fine. And that's why Chazal say that Yisurim can be even anything that upsets and interrupts the regular flow of life. You think you have a coin in one pocket, and you reach into the pocket and it has it in the other pocket. That's Yisurim. Because it upsets the natural flow of life, you have to think. You have to stop for a second. And that's what's Gorim Tshuva, when a person thinks. And sometimes we forget that the Rebbeinu Shalom's around the cloud. The Medrash says, Moshav, father is carrying his child on his shoulders. They pass someone, and the child looks down and he says, did you see my father? He's on his father's shoulders, and he forgot where he is. Forgot where the father is. So the father throws him down, and then he has to find his father, and then he realizes where the father is. Sometimes we're mamish al-kseifa of Shel HaKadosh Baruch, when everything that happens in our lives, the Rebbeinu Shalom is doing, and we don't forget about it. We forget we have any connection. So the Rebbeinu Shalom throws us down. Hishlich mishamayim oretz. And then we have to look for him, and we try to find out, where is the Rebbeinu Shalom? And then you'll find him because you think. And that's why the Medrashim compare Galus to tzoras. Person has tzoras, he knows something's wrong. And he has to think, and he's alone, and he gives him time to think by himself, not to be disturbed by being around other people. Let him have some introspection. Let him realize what's going on in his life and what's wrong with him, and he feels mamish like a mace. That's what Yisurim are. Yisurim are like, and that's what Galus is. The Rebbeinu Shalom was mazgir us to all these other places that we should think, that we should realize that our matzav is not the way that it was. We had a Beis HaMikdash, we thought everything was fine. But the Beis HaMikdash really was destroyed way before Titus or Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it. Soles Mesulas Salta. They just destroyed Beis HaMikdash. We destroyed the Beis HaMikdash with our Averas. And all that was left was a shell to destroy. And we thought everything was fine. We had a Beis HaMikdash. Chazal also say that Yisurim, we learn from Shein V'Ayin. Then Eved Kanani goes free. When you knock out his tooth, or you knock out his eye, or one of the other Rosh Eivorim. So Achas Kamba V'Kamba Yisurim, which affect the person's entire being. Galus, which affects an entire ummah for so long, surely has the power to set us free. What's the idea? The Torah T'mima Esakasha on the whole idea of Shein V'Ayin. So Machlokas, Reb Meir and the Chachamim, whether it's schus for an Eved to go free, or it's not a schus. And the Meir holds it's not a schus for an Eved to go free. An Eved would rather be hefker, he doesn't want to be free. So he asks, if that's the case, if you knock out his tooth, you knock out his eye, so because you did one bad thing to him, now do something else bad? If you hold that it's a schus for an Eved to be free, so I understand. You did something bad to your Eved, the Torah says, now let him free. But if being free for an Eved is not a good thing, then why in the world, if you knock out his eye, then you should do something worse to him also? Now also set him free, which is also a chova to him, according to Reb Meir. Says the Torah to me, very pashut. Even Reb Meir agrees that an Eved that has an Adon who knocks out his eye or knocks out his tooth, it's not a good thing to be an Eved to that kind of Adon. So then even Reb Meir would be masking that it's a schus for an Eved to get out of that Adon. We are Kona and Adon liatzmeinu. We have the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, and we make him an Adon over us. And we think he's a great guy. Gives us a lot of pleasure, gives us a lot of revach. And we think that that Adon is a very fine Adon. But then Yisurim come. And we see that the Adon is not such a great Adon. He didn't cause us such great Hanoah. It caused us a lot of tzaras. Then we understand that it's an inyan to go free from that Adon. That's going to do tshuva. That's the Shein V'ai. It reminds us and tells us who the Adon really is, that we're kona for ourselves. And when you're kona Adon acher liatzmo, you make the Yetzer Hara and the Satan your Adon, you should realize that Adon is the kind of Adon that knocks out your tooth and knocks out your eye and brings you Yisurim. And then you want to find the real Adon. Avodai heim v'lo avodim la'avodim. Chaim Friedlander Zatzal, when he experienced his own terrible, intense Yisurim, he had Yena Machala. So he wrote during those times how he feels he has to relate to those Yisurim. First he said a person has to realize that when he has Yisurim, and Galus is perhaps the greatest Yisurim. When we have Yisurim, we're sitting here suffering, feeling the Gehenna of Tisha B'Av, which is just a symbol, a small symbol of the Gehenna that Tisha B'Av caused the whole year, for years and years and years. You have to realize the Rebbeinu Shalom's talking to you. Because if you don't hear the Yisurim that the Rebbeinu Shalom is talking to you, maybe he's talking to somebody else, then there's not going to be any benefit from it. Torah says, Cain and Hevel brought korbanos. Cain's korban was rejected and Hevel's was accepted. And Cain felt very bad. He was very upset. He blamed his brother because his was accepted, mine wasn't. So the Rebbeinu Shalom gave Cain the first Musar Shmuz of history. He told him in Teitiv Se'ez, don't blame anybody else. If you'll better your ways, then you'll be forgiven and you'll be uplifted. Vimlo Seitiv Lepesach Chatas Roves, and if you don't do, the Yetzer Hara is waiting for you. Then the Torah says, Vayomer Cain al Hevel Achi. Cain said something to Hevel. And then Vayi biyosam basodeh vayokom Cain vayarog es Hevel Achi. Then later on they were in Sodeh and Cain killed Hevel. So obviously Iker Chosr min HaSefer here. What did Cain do to Hevel that eventually led that he should kill him? So there are many medrashim that fill in Torah Shabbal Peh what happened over here. They started to argue. They argued over the Yerusha, who's going to get the Metaltlin, who's going to get the Karkos of the world, who's going to get Eretz Yisrael, who's going to get the Mokom HaMikdash, and they argued and argued. And from those arguments, Vayomer Cain al Hevel Achiv, then Vayokom Cain, from the arguments, they came out to the Sodeh and Cain killed Hevel. Says the Ibn Ezra, what's the Pasuk shot in the Pasuk? There has to be a way of understanding the Pasuk without Medrash. There has to be a Pshuto Shal Nikra. What did Cain tell Hevel that's inherent in the Pasuk that then led him to kill Hevel? Says the Ibn Ezra, you know what he told Hevel? He told him the Musar that the Rebbeinu Shalom just told him. Vayomer Cain, Hevel Achiv, the Rebbeinu Shalom just told me a nice Musar Shmuz. The Pesach Chatas Roveitz and Teitiv Se'ez, he told that over to him. The Chora Bashkofa Rishona doesn't make sense. How could that be Pshuto Shal Nikra? The Torah says that as the preamble to what killing Hevel. If he told over the Musar to Hevel, that shouldn't make him kill him. That should obviously prevent him from killing him. How is that the sequence? Because Vayomer Kain al Hevel Achiv, he told him over the Musar. When I was much younger, the different Rabbonis, so sometimes I had Balabatim that needed to be told off, that needed to be given Musar, sometimes strong Musar. But since I was much younger than them and they were older than me and they were professionals, I felt intimidated to face give them the Musar they deserved. So I figured I had a perfect way of doing this. I would put it into my Shabbos drasha in a way that not everybody would know what I'm talking about, but the person who needed that Musar, I'm sure, would get the message. Be obvious to him. And that way I'd be Yotzei giving that person Musar and Tochacha, and I wouldn't have to face him face to face. So I remember once somebody did something that really needed to be corrected and needed to hear strong Musar in the Kehillah. And I snuck it into my Shabbos drasha, fire and brimstone tochacha for something that a person did was really not right. And I figured for sure he got the message. After davening, people came over to say good Shabbos, and I see this person coming with a big smile on his face. Comes over, he says, Rabbi, that was a great drasha, and I hope the people who needed that message got the message. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm sure they didn't, it was you. That's what happened with Cain. Cain heard this Musar directly from the Rabbanu Shalom. But Cain said, me? I don't need that Musar. There's only one other person around, probably meant it for my brother. So I'll give it over to him, right? It really gave it to them, not me. So the Rabbanu Shalom entrusted me with a Musar that he feels Hevel needs, but he doesn't want to speak to Hevel directly. So he gave it over to me, I'll give it over to Hevel. And because Cain didn't listen, he didn't take the Musar personally, he gave it over to Hevel. That was the reason why in the end he ended up killing Hevel. Had he taken the Musar and heard the Rabbanu Shalom was talking to him, would have been a difference. We say that the Eved Ivri, who after 7 years of being an Eved Ivri thinks it's a good thing to do, he didn't learn his lesson. So we pierce his earlobe. Euzin Sheshom al Har Sinai Avodaihem, and he went and sold himself as an Eved. Or Euzin Sheshom al Har Sinai Lo Signov, and he went and stole and couldn't pay, and he was sold as an Eved. So we pierce his ear. Anybody who's learned the anatomy knows that this part of the ear doesn't hear anything. It's a piece of cartilage. So I would say if you want to pierce the ear that didn't hear on Har Sinai what it should have heard, you should pierce the guy's inner ear. Stick a nail inside his ear and break his eardrum. Mustava the Rabbanu Shalom was a bigger Rachamon than me, so he was Yotzei with just a symbol. But I think there's a deeper idea. This part of the ear, the Gemara says in Ksubas, is called an afarcheses. It's like a funnel. If you didn't have an outer ear, the sound would just go right by you. This part of the ear collects the sound and directs it towards you. It's an afarcheses. The problem with the Eved Ivri is not that he didn't hear. He heard. Heard ganz fine. Everybody heard. Avodaihem. They all heard those signals. They didn't know the Rabbanu was talking to him. He let the sound just go by in the stomach. It's the guy behind me. The guy on the side. Not me. This part of the ear was the problem. It doesn't say Ozen Shaloshom al Har Sinai. It says Ozen Sheshom al Har Sinai. You heard it. But this part of the ear didn't direct the sound to you. You thought somebody else. It was them. Not you. You didn't take it personally. This part of the ear is the one that's the problem. A little bit difficult though, because relating that to Tisha B'Av really doesn't. The purpose of Tanios and the purpose of Yisurim and the purpose of Galus is to give us the incentive to do tshuva then Tisha B'Av doesn't have the motif of other Taniyos. All other Taniyos, Taka, the motif is tshuva, shlichus. Beg the Rebbeinu Shalom for forgiveness for the averos you did in vidui. That's tshuva. We're not saying any shlichus today. We're not saying any viduyim today. So where is the incentive to do tshuva? All we say is Kinnos. We're misabel. But there's not a mention bichlal of tshuva, of slichos. How does Tisha B'Av work? I just wanted to say, there's a mabit in Sefer Beis Elokim where he says what on the surface may seem to be a very simple thing, but I think what he is telling us is something very, very deep. He says that the Rebbeinu Shalom is a rachamon, and he didn't demand from us more than 1 day of fasting in the year. In our Torah, there's only 1 day of fasting. Al kaparas avonos is Yom Kippur. That's it. If it hadn't been for Churban Abayis, we wouldn't have more than 1 day. Now, because of the Churban, so we have another day called Tisha B'Av, similar to Yom Kippur. You take it face value, that's a Matisyahu. Without Churban, we'd have only 1 day, and now we have an extra day added. I think there's something much deeper here. That's the following. How does Yom Kippur work to induce a person to do tshuva? Not eating, not drinking. What is it about Yom Kippur that gives us the incentive to do tshuva? So some people say because you're suffering, you're afflicting yourself, so but that's not true. That's not what Yom Kippur is. Lo hayu yomim tovim liYisrael k'chamishaser ba'avu k'yom HaKippurim. Yom Kippur is an ecstatic day. Yom Kippur is an exhilarating day. It's a day, a Yom Tov. Yomim tovim, mamish. That's not how Yom Kippur induces us to do tshuva. What I think is that if you really understand Yom Kippur properly, so Yom Kippur is exactly like Olam Haba. What's Olam Haba? Ein lo bo achila v'lo shtiya. You're not grounded in the physical things of the world. You're way beyond that. Olam Haba is a spiritual world, a world of tahara, a world of shalom. Everybody is friendly. There's no arguments. There's no fights. And that's the way on Yom Kippur. We're mamish a day in Gan Eden, a day in Olam Haba. Lo bo achila v'lo shtiya. Everybody's dressed as malachim. People stand up like a malach. People look around and everybody's friendly, at least for Yom Kippur, till Motzei Yom Kippur at least. Everybody's friends, everybody has mechila, everybody's good, everybody looks at each other, mamish like malachim. Such a nice feeling to be so pure, to be in a world, an Olam Haba world without chait. And you feel bad. How can I be like this the whole year? Such a nice feeling to feel what Yom Kippur is Olam Haba. So when you feel that Olam Haba of Yom Kippur and you feel so bad that you don't have it the whole year, so you want to get as much as you can the whole year, so do tshuva, get rid of those chatoyim, those averos that take away that tahara, that Olam Haba of Yom Kippur. That's what Yom Kippur is. As long as there was a Beis HaMikdash, one could feel mamish Olam Haba on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol went lifnai v'lifnim, and there was a sir l'Azazel, and the averos, were taken away. You could see it. The tzemer turned from red to white. You could mamish see kaparas averos. You could feel mamish Olam Haba. But once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, so Yom Kippur was diminished. How do I know that it affected even Yom Kippur? Because it affects Shabbos too. The Mishnah says in Tainis that when they made Taniyos, full day Taniyos, 24-hour Taniyos for Geshomim, they never made a Tainis on Sunday. Only on a Monday. But never on a Sunday. Why? Because to go from Shabbos to a full day Tainis is life-threatening. And therefore they never made a Tainis on a Sunday. It was mamish, the contrast between Shabbos and a full day Tainis was sakonas nefashos. I don't understand that. Because we do that many times. Many times Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbos and we push it off to Sunday, or it falls on Sunday and we fast mamish right after Shabbos, a full day tightness of Tisha B'Av. I don't remember hearing of anybody who died because of that. And if it would be Sakonis the Farshas, the Rabbanan couldn't make a din that you have Tisha B'Av on Sunday. And we fast on Sunday. What's the problem? Now, Tisha B'Av only falls when there's no Beis HaMikdash. When there's no Beis HaMikdash, Shabbos isn't the same Shabbos. When there's a Beis HaMikdash, Shabbos was Shabbos. Shabbos was Me'ein Olam Haba. To go from Olam Haba into a Tainus was life-threatening. But Tisha B'Av, after Churban Beis HaMikdash, Shabbos is not the same Shabbos anymore. You don't feel that Olam Haba on Shabbos that you felt in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. So there, the contrast is not that great. You can fast on Sunday too. Same thing with Yom Kippur. You want to feel mamish dazzled with Yom Kippur, such a day of Tahara, and that's gorim you to do tshuva. Doesn't work after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So that's what the Mabit says. Had it been no Churban, Yom Kippur would be one day of tightness that would be enough to be gorim kaporos avonos. But now there's no Beis HaMikdash, and Yom Kippur is diminished, and you can't feel that. You can't feel that Olam Haba on Yom Kippur. So what do you have to do? I'll tell you. If you walk into a room with bright lights, it dazzles you. It blinds you. That's what Yom Kippur was like before Churban Beis HaMikdash. But if you walk in a room with dim lights, walk into a room like this, just with daylight, doesn't dazzle you, doesn't blind you. But there's a way that you can make a room like this with dim light dazzle you and blind you also. You know how? First go into a cellar where there's no light at all. Stay there for about a half an hour, 45 minutes until your eyes get completely adapted to the total darkness, and then come out into this room and you'll be dazzled. You'll get blinded. Because the contrast between the total darkness and this dim light will make the dim light mamish like the light of the room with dazzling bright lights. Therefore, when there's no Beis HaMikdash, you need another full day fast. Also, lo bo achila v'lo shtiya, you go into another world, but not the world of Olam Haba and Gan Eden, but the world of Gehenna. Ein bo lo achila v'lo shtiya, ve'ein bo shalom, ve'ein bo Torah. That's Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is also a day in another world, but it's a day in Gehenna. And when you spend a day in Gehenna, in that darkness, and then you come out to even the dim lit Yom Kippur, then you can be dazzled by Yom Kippur. Then you can feel Olam Haba. Aye, what's the connection between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur? We've got a long way to go to Yom Kippur. It's not really true. Because we have 21 days that hopefully we had prepared already for this day. From Shivasa B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av is 21 days. 7 days is a unit of time. You want to accomplish something, you do it in 7 days' time. Every Yom Tov is 7 days. And Avelis and Simcha, V'Chosim Kala, 7 days. It's a unit of time. 3 times 7 is a chazaka on that unit. 3 times 7, 21 days, we prepared ourselves to feel something today. Hopefully. We went through the motions at least of realizing that maybe we'll sit here and feel Gehenna. And then you have to internalize it. Okay, so you feel it today. But you have to now make it part of you. So you need another 21 days. 21 days after Tisha B'Av ends on Rosh Chodesh Elul. Another 21 days to internalize what you felt today, Gehenna. And Rosh Chodesh Elul starts a 40-day process that leads to Yom Kippur. That's the connection. We spent 21 days preparing to feel Gehenna today. If you're prepared well, you'll feel what Gehenna is. And then we have 21 days to internalize it before we start the process that ends in Yom Kippur. And then when Yom Kippur comes, we'll be able to contrast the Olam Haba of Yom Kippur with the Gehenna of Tisha B'Av, and then Yom Kippur will have its effect. So this day is not a day of tshuva, but it is, because it is the cause that Yom Kippur will do tshuva. So today we have to be concentrate on Avelis, not tshuva. We're not ready for tshuva yet. We're ready to feel Gehenna. Then Yom Kippur will be able to make us feel the Gan Eden of what an Olam without Chet is. Second, To'elis of Yisurim, of Galus. If it wouldn't be for Yisurim and Galus in this world, then we'd have to suffer all of this in the next world. And that has no limits. That's a terrible thing. So the Rebbeinu Shem gave us the ability to go through the Yisurim and Gehenna in this world without having to go through the Gehenna in the next world. The Medrash says that that was what Avromi Avinu was told by Shibut Mitzrayim. Klal Yisrael have a pagam. There's something innately missing in the foundation of Klal Yisrael that needs to be corrected. And there's two doing it. One is through Gehenna in the next world, the neshamas can be corrected, or they can go through Shibut Mitzrayim in this world. And Avromi Avinu picked Shibut Mitzrayim. Better to go through Shiva Madure Gehenna in this world than to go through it in the next world. The Vilna Gaon. One time the Vilna Gaon said, in Divrei Musar, he gave his Talmidim, Ki masha anoshim choshvim, shahametur b'sefer reishis chochma ala gehenim, hu ulai guzma, zeu tos, elahem tvorim kaviyosam. Look in the reishis chochma and see how he describes Yisurei Gehenim. So the Vilna Gaon said, don't think that they're a guzma, they're exactly mamish what Gehenim is going to be. There was one of his Talmidim who heard what the Gra said, and he took it so much to heart that he got sick, and he almost died. And after months of recuperating, he came to the Gaon, and he told him that what happened. Because the Gaon told him that these Yisurei Gehenim that are depicted in the Reishis Chacham are mamish pshuto k'mashma. He couldn't take it, got sick. So the Gaon told him that 100% true. But I forgot to add one thing that maybe would have protected you and given you a little bit of solace. And that is that a person who goes through Yisurim in this world, those Yisurim can take away and be in the place of those Yisurim of Gehenna. So what you're going to get in Gehenna after 120 years, 100% what it says in the Reishis Chacham. But a person who goes through Yisurim in this world, those Yisurim take away that. They're a tmura for that. And if a person would know how much Yisurim in this world help him, he wouldn't complain about the Yisurim that he has in this world. The Maisa, person who was critically ill on a life support system, suffering tremendously, and the doctor who was in charge of this patient saw how much he's suffering, and he saw that there's no real big chance of this person surviving too much longer. And if he'll just unplug the machine, he'll let the person die in peace. Mercy killed him. So he unplugged the machine, the person died. A few days later, this chola came to this doctor, not frum doctor, in a dream. And he told him that he needed 4 more days in this world to suffer. And then his din in Shamayim would have come out okay. Because he didn't have those 4 days of suffering, because the doctor killed him mercifully. So now his din in Shamayim was terrible, and he's now designated to terrible, terrible Yisurim in the next world. And he blames the doctor for taking away that opportunity of suffering 4 more days. and absolving him from all that din in Shamayim where he could have been Yotzei in this world. The doctor was so impressed, to say the least, with this dream, that he knew that it was a true dream, that he himself became a Baal Tshuva. So sometimes we don't appreciate Yisurim. Sitting here on the floor, we're in Galus, there's a lot of things that personally, each person has their personal Yisurim of all different kinds. Klal Yisrael has their Yisurim, different places, different kinds of Yisurim, different generations, different Yisurim. And one of the tachlios of those Yisurim, of that Galus, is to take the place of those tzoros that we would have to suffer in the next world. Better that tikkun should come in this world. That's the whole idea of kapara. Kapara is not slicha, mechila, it's not tshuva. It's just sometimes the aveira is so intense that you need something to be machsher, to be maked in it, to reduce it, in order to make the tshuva be able to take effect. I always like to say, if tshuva is like a detergent that cleans off your neshama by doing tshuva, then kapara is like a pre-soak. Sometimes you have a garment that is so stained that the detergent won't take out the stain. So you first have to soak it in something else, and the soaking won't take out the stain. But it'll prepare the stain and loosen it up, that then the detergent can take it out. Kapara was korbanos and a million other things. Yisurim also, so kapara. They won't forgive your aveiros if you don't do tshuva. But they'll make the aveira in a state that now the tshuva will be able to help and to wipe away the aveira completely. The last toelis is l'zachech u'letzaref, the tzoros and the yisurim and Galus itself bring out the tremendous potential of Klal Yisrael. Sometimes when you have to think, and things don't come easily, so the avoda is much more choice avoda. The Chafetz Chaim explains the Gemara, "Chashaki moshivani k'neisei olam zet Talmud Bavli." The Rebbeinu Shem thrust us into the darkness, like the dead. Tisha B'Av, we're in darkness, like dead. Gehenna, Galus. That's Talmud Bavli. Says the Chafetz Chaim, you know what it means? Klal Yisrael sometimes produce the greatest production, the greatest thing when they're in tzoros. If it hadn't been for the tzoros of Galus, we never would have produced Talmud Bavli. But because of the tzoros, because of the Yisurim, it brought out the best in us. The Medrash says that Klal Yisrael compared to zaysim, to olives. The olive only produces its best oil when it's beaten. You have to press it, put it under lachats, and then you get the good oil from the zayis. When we're b'tzar and yisurim, so then mipum tzara agra, then even a little bit of avodas Hashem. If we're not capable of serving the Ribono Shel Olam in the most ideal fashion, then at least when there's tzoros and yisurim, mipum tzara agra, that in itself makes our diminished avodas Hashem of a greater stature. That's why in Galus we benefit. I always like to mention the Medrash. Medrash says that Shvur Malka, the king of Persia, once chided Shmuel. And he said, you know, your Mashiach has taken a long time to come. Maybe it's because his donkey is so slow. If I'll give him maybe a nice white horse from my stables, maybe he'll come a little faster. So Shmuel said, yeah, maybe you could give us a nice horse to make Mashiach come faster, but your horse would not have the beautiful colors of Mashiach's donkey. I saw in the Sefer what it means is the following. Klal Yisrael should have been able to reach all of its potential in Eretz Yisrael with a Beis HaMikdash, but we weren't zoche to that. And we weren't able, and just the opposite. The Beis HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael caused us to be chote. We thought that everything's fine, we have a kesher with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we didn't have any kesher. All we had was what, a pretense, it looked. We had a shell of a Beis HaMikdash, but the Ikar Beis HaMikdash wasn't there. So the Rebbeinu Shalom destroyed that and sent us amongst the Goyim. And now each Galus brings out another potential that Klal Yisrael should have been able to get in Eretz Yisrael, but they get in that place. And the Michtav Eliyahu says that every Galus brings out a different shade of Avoda in Klal Yisrael. That's all part of that Shleimus Avoda. Galus in Germany brought out one kind of Avodas Hashem. He said wherever Jews were, the Hashpah came through the Sorim of that nation, and even the Avodas Hashem was colored by that. And it wasn't a negative thing. It's because that aspect of Avodas Hashem we had to get from that Goyim. Yekis came from German Galus, and there's certain positive things about being a Yeki. In a Hungarian Galus, so it came more, a Russian Galus, he says, was more of an emotional thing. Hasidus came from there. He said in Lithuanian Galus was more of a analytical kind of Galus. We got those milas in Derech HaTorah from a Litvish Galus. And each one is a different color of that donkey of Mashiach. Then we come back finally to Eretz Yisrael, each Galus added something to the Shleimus of Klal Yisrael. So we gain from Galus too. It brings out the potential from the Tsar, from the Yisurim. Chazal say that Adarabah, we get a chance to see the Goyim. We lived in Eretz Yisrael, and we looked around and saw the world, and we wanted to live like Goyim. So the Rebbeinu says, fine, go get a closer look and see how the Goyim live, see if you want to live like that. You can look at all of them. Go around. We went around the whole world, see all the Goyim that there are, see what the world is all about. And not only that, the Goyim get to see us too. And sometimes they see us at our best, and that's how we get Gerim. Ohigla Yisrael bein ha'umos ela le'sosif aleim Gerim. Goyim who want to become Gerim, whether they're Gerei Emes or they're Gerei Toshav, even though there's no Ger Toshav Bisman Hazeh in Halacha. But the Maisa Goyim who keep their 7 mitzvahs because they're impressed with Klal Yisrael. Or they look at us and see what happens to people who don't keep Ratzon Hashem, and that's ma'orah them to do what's right. And therefore the Chafetz Chaim says that Galus is like a hospital. It's not a great place to be, but if you're sick, it's a good place to be, and you shouldn't leave until you get better. So the hospital of Galus has tremendous benefits. Benefits to be Goren Tshuva, to let us suffer in the place of suffering in the next world, and to bring out a tremendous potential that can't be brought out unless we go through those tzoros and yisurim. And therefore, I chose today to speak about the 5 things that happened on Tisha B'Av and their causes, so we can feel that Gehenna and feel those tsar, feel those yisurim, what the yisurim of Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni and Nechrish Ha'ir, and each one represents certain averas that happen, and those averas are the tzara itself. They're the churban itself. We'll speak about those 5 things, and in each one there are 1 or 2 different aspects, and altogether we will go through 9 Kinnos that represent all the aspects, or a good number of these aspects of these 5 things. And the Mirz Hashem, if we feel that Gehenna, then we'll start the process to be able to use that to contrast to the Gan Eden of Yom Kippur. We'll be able to really do tshuva and use Yom Kippur in the most ideal way. And in that way, when we'll do tshuva and we'll correct all of this Gehenna that we created, then we'll taka bizoche to see that Gan Eden of Bias HaMashiach and HaRav Zev Leff. That we will start the Kinnos of Shavas.